We see it as part of the Cumberland Road or the National Road, which was part of the American system, banking, tariffs, and a network of transportation. We see this as something that's going to unify the country in a time where people are looking for unity. Now, Jackson says, I don't like this idea because there should be no federal funding for intra-state transportation projects. Whether it is, in fact, his belief that the federal government should not get involved in states or it's a dig at Henry Clay, it's a bit inconsequential, but it shows us that he is not going to be a big fan of states' rights overall. Leading us to South Carolina, where this nullification crisis is being, I don't want to say spearheaded, but led in secret at first by none other than his vice president, John C. Calhoun. Okay? And there's a whole story about Peggy Eaton, this harlot, okay, who gets involved with John Eaton, the Secretary of War, and there may or may not have been marriages overlapping, which may or may not have been similar to Andrew Jackson's marriages that are overlapping. And if you're in Frantonius's class, you certainly know the story of Rachel Jackson. If he's still teaching it the same way, that sweet, sweet Rachel Jackson is, for some reason, very important to him. Okay. Now, conflict over states' rights. Congress passes this tariff. Okay, so they had this tariff that I told you about, where they planted this in John Quincy Adams' lap, and he said, "Okay, I'll take it." And Northern industrialists like tariffs because, again, it protects their products from foreign competition. The states in the South, particularly agricultural states, don't like it because, as I said before, they've got to now buy more expensive American goods, but their farm goods don't have a commensurate sort of protection wall. So, the nullification crisis is based on the idea that came from the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. And I think, did I talk about this before? No. Would it have been Barrett? I think it was Barrett. Virginia and Kentucky resolutions come as a result of the Alien and Sedition Acts, where Thomas Jefferson believes that it's all about states having the power to rule on the constitutionality of congressional laws. Now, this is obviously going to be solved in Marbury versus Madison by John Marshall, but at this time it hadn't been solved. So they bring up this idea that we call compact theory, that in fact, we the states created the government, and if the government, particularly Congress, passes a law that we don't like and that we think is unconstitutional, we can nullify that law, and if in fact Congress continues, we can secede. Now, that comes to us in 1798 and 1799. We got to fast forward now to 1828 through 1833, where South Carolina is going to seize upon this particular theory, which actually wasn't terribly influential at all in its time. And what it says is, we declare your tariff null and void. They've taken the idea from Virginia and Kentucky, and they've made it a reality. In something written by John C. Calhoun, secretly, of course, as vice president, the South Carolina Expositions. And in fact, there is a tariff that comes down in 1832 that's better, okay, more amenable to South Carolina than the 1828 one, but it's still a tariff. And a tariff is a tariff, and they don't like any tariffs. So what they do is, as a result of their nullification, that draws Jackson's ire, because no one tells Andrew Jackson what to do. So he has the force bill, where he says, I will bring the military down, and I will force this down your throat. And the story goes that Andrew Jackson wanted to actually go fight himself, and they said, you can't do that anymore, you're the president, send the military instead. Now, there's music, and I don't know if you can hear it, but anytime the country's about to come apart, there's music that starts playing, and Henry Clay always comes onto the scene. He says, you need to compromise? I'm here, okay? I did it in 1820, I'm going to do it in 1833, I'm going to do it in 1850, and it will get me nowhere near the White House, okay? So Henry Clay comes on the scene, he says, I can solve this. And more than anything, he didn't want Andrew Jackson to win because they're nemesis. Go back to Maysville Road. They're always trying to one-up each other. They're from the same area, but they see each other certainly as enemies. So this tariff that diffuses the situation is still going to be there. It's going to be reduced over 10 years. But at the end of the day, South Carolina got some of what it wanted, which is a lower tariff. Andrew Jackson gets some of what he wanted, in that they back down from nullification, and Henry Clay looks like the hero. But the final FU by South Carolina is, we nullify your force bill. We win. Bye. Okay. All right. So we're out. So it's important to realize that, again, Jackson is not really for the common man if you're going to assume that the common man is more states' rights. Now, happening during the Jacksonian era, but not germane to Jackson necessarily, is this whole Texas issue. And I know this is confusing because I'm going to talk about Texas, and then I'm going to talk about the Mexican-American War, and it starts in Texas, but in fact, we're not fighting over Texas because we already have Texas at that point, so it confuses stuff. So I'm going to do my best to explain this part, and then I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and come back to Mexico in a minute. But what I want you to know is people in the South wanted Texas. Cotton growing has moved all the way down from the Virginia area all the way through what we call the Black Belt because of the soil, all the way through Alabama, all the way through Louisiana, and into eastern Texas. So Texas is highly desirable, but of course it was governed by Spain, and then the Mexicans fight off Spain, so it's governed by Mexico, and they invite the first 300 families, that's what they're known as, to come into Texas. Now there are a number of conditions that are important. One is they must become Mexican citizens. Two, they must become Catholic. And no slavery is allowed. Now, they're going there to grow cotton. There is no way they are ever going to honor the third piece about no slavery. And that's going to be the real bugbear in this whole issue, okay? Mexico's going to free its slaves, and at that point you can see a war on the horizon between the Texans and the Mexicans, okay? Texans are jailed while protesting all of this, and then Santa Anna is going to take on the Texans. Now, this is not really important overall in the grand scheme of things, but it's a necessary precondition for what we're going to see. So, the Texans declare that they are their own country. Okay, Santa Anna attacks the Alamo. Has anybody seen Pee-wee's Big Adventure? Yes, like two people. Okay. What was that? Does Pee-wee's Big Adventure have a guinea pig in it? No, this is all about the basement of the Alamo. There's a whole long thing about the basement of the Alamo. Okay, teaching it years ago, people used to still watch it. Okay, so we lose at the Alamo, and it becomes a battle cry. Remember the Alamo. And then we lose at a place called Goliad. So it's like, remember the Alamo and Goliad. And then we trap Santa Anna at a battle of San Jacinto. He's actually taking a siesta. Not a joke. That's how we capture him. And at that point, he's got to give in. And he says, okay, we'll give you your independence for my freedom. And just like Santa Anna does, every single time Santa Anna is caught, as he's running away, he said, I had my fingers crossed the whole time, okay? And of course, we're going to try to bring him back to the Mexican-American War, and he leads Mexico 6 different times, okay? But the real point here is, once the Texans say, we have our own country, they don't want to be a country. That's not their goal. Their goal is to become part of the United States. But despite the fact that people like the Austin family, okay, Stephen F. Austin, his dad, before him, Moses Austin, Sam Houston, these are all Jackson's people to begin with, but they won't touch it. And the reason they don't want to touch it is they don't want to have to deal with the inclusion of more slave states. They know that that is a political hot potato. We can go back to the Compromise of 1820, sort of dealing with all of that. The Northerners say this is just a slavocracy. This is something that if we take in Texas, we know we are giving the spoils to the South, and that's not fair. Okay? So at this point, it's its own country. Andrew Jackson won't touch it. Martin Van Buren won't touch it. William Henry Harrison, the 6 weeks that he's alive, won't touch it. John Tyler, the one that no one likes, won't touch it until the very, very end. Okay? Now, this is important because we've now got the birth of a new party. So we had the National Republicans, sort of your John Quincy Adamses. You've got your Democrats, your Jacksonians. But now you're going to get the Whigs. And it's important to understand what the Whigs are about. The Whigs are in opposition to Jackson. And the name says it all. They claim to be the extension of the Whigs of Britain who fought against the king who was a brute. And they're saying King Andrew is a brute. Okay? They're supporters of Henry Clay, also of Daniel Webster. Okay? They support the American system, banking, network of transportation, and tariffs. Okay? And in this particular election, you've got the puppet, little Martin Van Buren. He was a little man. And you've got him running against a number of different Whig candidates. The little magician, Van Buren, wins. Now, this is the gift. Andrew Jackson says, I made you president. I basically convinced everyone that you'd be a great president. Here, I'm going to leave you a financial cluster F. Deal with it. Bye. Okay, I'm gone. And what he leads him with is all of the problems that came from getting rid of BOTUS. So you've got over-speculation, which of course is the reason that we have a panic. if I said tariff of 1819, apologies, I meant panic of 1819 earlier. 1837, 1857, 1873, and 1893, they all come from over-speculation of some sort or another. The specie circular, which was Jackson's solution to the problem that he created, which was to say that all debts and basically land that you were buying had to be paid with hard money, with gold. And since many people out west didn't have the gold, they went bankrupt. So Andrew Jackson, through his own effort to create a bonus for the people out west, then created a solution that hurt them even more. So the little magician's got to deal with all of this. The Whigs, not surprisingly, say, let's give them bank credit, banking, let's have higher tariffs and internal improvements. Your classic BTN that Alexander Hamilton came up with, that the Whigs are going to continue, and then later on, the Republicans are going to continue. So we're going to move right now to 1840. And 1840 is a turning point election, because now we've got the Whigs running a legitimate candidate against the Democrats. This is one of only 2 times that the Whigs actually win. They nominate the War of 1812 hero, and even before that, William Henry Harrison, Old Tippecanoe. And it's an interesting election, because William Henry Harrison, Old Tippecanoe, is labeled as liking hard cider and log cabins. Hey, what a Westerner. Couldn't be anything farther from the truth. He's one of the original first families of Virginia, as wealthy as could be. But that stuck to him. He's like, yeah, call me a commoner. That's great. That's currency right now. Whereas Martin Van Buren, who wasn't necessarily a rich guy, was labeled as such. So in this campaign, which is considered the first modern election with sort of all the pomp and circumstance and very high voter turnout and all the parades and hard cider, you're going to see William Henry Harrison win. That's considered the end of the Jacksonian era and the beginning of the Whigs. Now, of course, that Whig president will live for a very, very short time to be succeeded by a former Democrat turned Whig, John Tyler. Okay? So we sort of wrap up this particular Jacksonian era. But we're now emerging into the first 2-party system that we've seen in a while. Remember, the era of good feeling just had one party. So sort of 1800, we start the Federalists, and then we end the Federalists, sorry. And then we're going no more Federalists, 1804, 1808, 1812, 1816, 1820, 1824, and then 1828, finally, we have National Republicans versus the Democrats, and then the National Republicans sort of recede, and by 1840, we have 2 legitimately strong parties. The Democrats are the common man's party, true to Jefferson, going all the way back, small government, farmer, your lower classes, namely West and the South, okay? Your Whigs, who are your former Federalists and soon-to-be Republicans, okay, want a stronger federal government. Again, they want all of the internal improvements in the tariff and the banking. They tend to be from the wealthier classes, okay, and centralized to the East Coast. So we've got those conditions, but we've got to pay attention to the entire time in the South. Cotton has been growing. Thank you, Eli Whitney, okay? So as a result, we've got booming cotton production in the South, which is very, very important to the North because they're the ones who actually turn this cotton into anything usable at all. And with this demand for cotton, you're going to see a push that is going to go out of sort of the old South into the new South, what we call the Cotton Belt. Very, very important because as you push west, you're also coinciding with a key idea that we call manifest destiny, okay? And we'll get to that in a second. Because cotton is so land intensive, it needs labor, you're going to need to bring in more and more slaves. At this point, we're not bringing any more slaves from out of the country. It's all an internal slave trade, okay? And we've got, I think, we may have dealt with slavery in past lectures. We're not necessarily going to deal with it in this lecture, except to know that that is an issue that's obviously dividing the North and the South. So any acquisitions in the South are seen as pro-slavery, thereby aggrieving the Northerners. And that's going to be something that is going to contribute to disunion. Okay? So you can watch the Cotton Kingdom sort of extend all the way down here into Texas. Now, America heads west. John O'Sullivan famously said, manifest destiny. This goes back in many ways to John Winthrop's City on a Hill. We are a people predestined for greatness. It does not matter who is in the way, i.e. Indians, okay, Native Americans. It does not matter because if in fact we come into contact with them, how are we making them better?
Moving them away.
Well, we're either moving them away so we create less tension, but guys, what are we bringing to them? Christianity and civilization, of course. They're better because of us. So it's a win-win. We're moving west and they're getting better. All right, so the key idea that you want to think about is it's not just people that are doing this because of manifest destiny. There's actually people that are benefiting from it with trapping and trading, mountain men who